everybody, Boba here. Today I want to talk about the most compelling character in LEGO Monkey Kid, and I think that would be Macaque. Now, I want to note that this is based on seasons 1 through 3 since season 4 hasn't come out yet, at least not in my area. But before we get into that, please like, subscribe, and comment. Our goal is 100 subscribers and I'd like for you to be part of that. Leave any ideas for what you want to see next. Now, let's grab our tea and begin. When watching LEGO Monkey Kid, one of our first antagonists we meet is Macaque. He's a monkey demon who uses shadow magic and looks strikingly similar to Sun Wukong. He's charismatic, skilled, and he uses his shadow magic to rival Monkey King, and he's pretty good at it. Like Wukong, he can make clones, he has a staff, and he can transform into multiple types of animals. Yet Macaque has other tricks up his sleeve. For example, he can summon one very large shadow clone along with an army of smaller ones. He can mimic other people's appearance and voice, and he can use magic to travel or hide. He's a very stealthy character, and it makes him pretty hard to catch. Out of all of the characters within LEGO Monkey Kid, I would have to say Macaque is one of the more complex. He has a very complicated history with Wukong, and being a bit of a trickster. Probably one of the more fascinating parts of his character is that complex dynamic he has with Wukong. Before going into how he's relatable to the audience, I think it's first crucial to establish the 3 major relationships that he has through season 1 and 3. My caveat to this is that season 4 may shed a lot more light onto this situation, but this is basically what I gleaned from season 1 through 3. To really begin, we have to look at the relationship between Macaque and Wukong. We can see that they used to be good friends before things went sour. The story in Shadowplay reveals a good bit of the betrayal Macaque suffered at the hands of Wukong, especially from Macaque's point of view. It seems at first that Macaque and Sun Wukong were really close friends, and they worked really hard to keep each other safe and achieve their goals, whatever that may be. A rift began to form between them as Sun Wukong grew stronger, eventually leaving Macaque behind, and it's clearly something that hurt him. Macaque goes as far to acknowledge that he's got issues he should talk about, but he quickly dismisses it and becomes very bitter to the idea of heroes and how they'll eventually leave their friends behind, because all through that play, he's described Wukong as the hero. As the series continues, we learn that this grudge and bitterness have just festered after Sun Wukong had killed him. He suffered a wound which rendered him blind in his right eye, though it's often hidden by magic. Phrases such as, "Are you ever going to get sick of living in my shadow? That's a relief, I thought it was someone important." And, "What, you're her puppet now? Guess that makes sense, you always had a sidekick kind of vibe." Even though all of this is said, deep down Macaque still cares. We can briefly see this at the end of season 3 by him reluctantly helping MK save Wukong. I suspect to some extent Macaque longs for the way things used to be. The relationship Lady Bone Demon had with Macaque is probably pretty important to establish. It's not as intense as the other relationships he has, but it's very defining for his character. Lady Bone Demon has been the driving force for many of Macaque's actions within the series. She was the one to bring him back from the dead and threatened to send him back to the land of the dead unless he obeyed. Oftentimes it was showed that he was actively avoiding her and avoiding the missions until the last possible moment and forced to obey. These interactions showed his fear of death, but also his desire to thrive and survive on his own without being held down by another person. As I've watched this series, other than the very first episode where Macaque was introduced, he never really goes out of his way to actually hurt MK and his friends, just antagonize them a bit. The only time he actually becomes aggressive is when Wukong is involved, which makes sense considering their history. Out of everything in the show, I think MK has the most impact on Macaque's personality. Yes, Sun Wukong shaped that bitterness in his heart, and the desire to be independent and free was nurtured by the Lady Bone Demon. But all of these things drove Macaque to become a loner, forced away from people due to being seen as a threat. Yet it was MK who saw more in Macaque, choosing to give him opportunities that would allow him to be more than just another villain. and at least sometimes he talked to him with dignity and respect in comparison to the others. He didn't demean Macaque. Instead, he chose to learn from him even when it wasn't always willingly. When I say that, I'm specifically thinking about the episode Shadow Play. MK realizes that the story that Macaque's telling about the warrior and the hero was actually about Wukong and Macaque's shattered relationship rather than himself. It's the first time Macaque sees that MK isn't blind and dense as he once suspected. However, the most impactful moment for Macaque is when MK says that he won't give up on Mei, despite how she's being overtaken by the Samadhi fire. It's the first time Macaque realizes that MK isn't just a copy of Wukong and his mistakes. He's stunned, unable to process it in that moment. Because of that, MK proved that he was more of a real hero than Sun Wukong ever was. MK was willing to sacrifice himself for another person rather than turn his back on her. Macaque is left speechless and looks to Wukong, and Wukong looks to him, and it seems as if he truly regrets that part of his life. All of this together is why when MK asks for his help to save Monkey King, not as a hero, but rather as a warrior, that he reluctantly ends up agreeing. MK sees the world in Macaque for what he really was, and it was a way Wukong had not seen him in a very long time. Macaque wasn't asked to change, but to be himself. To fight to save Wukong, them, and the world from being killed off. Like I said at the beginning of the video, out of all the characters in the show, Macaque is probably the most relatable because of these complex relationships and interactions. This character doesn't start with a tragic backstory. Rather, he starts off as a strong-willed individual with a good friend, thriving and happy. However, it's the disintegration of that friendship that starts him down a path of grief. And after all these years, he's not been able to overcome it, but has rather started his own self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, this is speculation on my part, but something in me says that Macaque is probably pretty extroverted when he feels comfortable around another person. But the crumbling of this important friendship has forced him to turn inward due to the abandonment. After all, it's the closest people to you who are able to hurt you the most. This resentment and wanting to become better than Wukong, it was probably driven by the need to get his attention, to force his former friend to acknowledge him as more than just his shadow. Macaque knows he's not lesser than Sun Wukong, but until it's acknowledged, it's hard for him to move past the anger and begin healing. Macaque isn't a one-dimensional villain. He just seems to want to be on his own unless he gets some amusement out of harassing MK and Sun Wukong. I'll be honest, I really think he just harasses MK because he's jealous and kind of admires him and just loves to make Monkey King crazy. When I talk about the jealousy, let me go into that a little more. Think about it from his perspective. This random kid is getting the attention of his previous best friend. That friend is even changing the way he acts to better help MK, which frustrates him. If you look back in the episode where he was introduced, he states that Sun Wukong would have flattened the entire mountain range to fight him, but was holding back for some kid. What changed all of this was MK's personality. He was determined, had insecurities, and acknowledged that Sun Wukong had even been the one to abandon him. Because of that, he's able to reach out and slowly change how he interacts with him. Even Macaque states multiple times within the show that MK is a good kid. Macaque might think he's naive, but to some degree he respects it. After all, if you look back in Shadow Play, he chooses to release MK's friends and leave without continuing to fight. MK actually might have even lost to Macaque since Wukong was gone and his friends were stuck in the lamp. Macaque showed mercy. I think this show really helps people see that everyone can be dealt a bad hand of cards in life. Sometimes the only way to get outside of that is to have someone help you out. People can empathize with the pain of betrayal, the fear of being vulnerable again, and the frustration of the situation. People can even see that sometimes the fear and consequences don't just go away with time. It's only when actively addressing the issue, which by the way would not have been possible without MK. In reality, Monkey King is just as bad as Macaque. just in ways that rarely anyone acknowledges. It isn't even till May gives Monkey King a piece of her mind that someone actually says to his face that he's a terrible teacher. You know, sometimes in situations, you can feel like that. Like you've done nothing wrong, or you know you're trying to fix it. But you also know that the other person is wrong too, and no one else acknowledges it. Rather, you get blamed and painted as the instigator, the betrayer, the problem. Macaque also has a pretty realistic way of handling these issues. He fights to regain the respect he used to have so many years ago. He's trying to fix it the only way he knows how. By no means does this mean that's the healthy way to work through things, but he's just a person like everyone else. People don't always, and most of the time don't, choose the healthy way. Overall, I have to say Macaque is probably the most relatable out of all the characters. It's real, it's not hidden, and it clearly bothers him. We've all been there at some point in our life. Be it disappointment, jealousy, anger, the need to be acknowledged, the need to be right, feeling abandoned, and feeling like the whole world has turned on you. If you want to see these things in particular, I would suggest watching Lego Monkey Kid. This show has some really well-written characters. But for now, I'm going to sign off. Don't forget to comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and have a discussion. I'll see you in the next video.